Good evening, students. I want to show you the technology that comes with your MyMathLab called StatCrunch and how useful it is as an aid to calculate many of the statistics and probabilities that you will have in this course. And in Module 3, we see in question number 12 that we have to calculate the sample variance and sample standard deviation. Now, the way I'm going to calculate this is by using one of the two formulas that are in your textbook and in your contents of your studies, and that is the formula that uses the mean. Remember that the variance is more or less um, the average of the distance squared from the mean for each data value. So what we have to do is get the mean, subtract it from each data value, square it, take the sum of those squares and divide by n minus 1. So if you don't recall that, you'll see some of that information as I do this, or you could go back and review your content. So the first thing to do to use StatCrunch, you see it over here. Actually, you do not want to do this unless you want to do it a little bit longer. You don't want to click on that StatCrunch. What you want to do is click on this little button here, this table or rectangular box that's next to the numbers. So I'm going to click on that and just take the first selection, which is Open in StatCrunch. And there is your numbers. And I'm just going to label that column my data. And the typical label is X. So I'm going to call that X. Now, as you recall, for the mean form of the sample variance, we need to calculate the mean. Now, we can do one of two ways. We can actually get whole bunch of statistics under stat, but we're going to do it from something called data so you can get familiar with how to use StatCrunch to do some ordinary calculations that you have learned. So here I'll click on data, come down to compute expression, and click on that. We're going to compute an expression. And let's open this up a little bit. And since we're using this the first time, and you can see we can punch in numbers, the expression will show up here. The columns of data that we have are listed here, and there's functions that we can use that are built in. And we are going to calculate the mean. The mean is, of course, the sum of the values divided by n. Most of us are familiar with that, so instead of going through that calculation directly, we're going to use the mean function in StatCrunch. So we'll add it here. And now we want to take the mean of the numbers that are in our X column, the data values. So I'm going to select X, add it, and there it is. And now StatCrunch has all it needs for the expression. I click OK. And now I tell StatCrunch to compute the mean on the column X. And it will take that and put it in a column, the next available column on its right. It keeps always adding to the next available column on the right. Now, as you may have seen in a similar video for Excel, they had to put the same number down the column, and I'll do the same thing here. So I'm just going to type in 11.2, 11.2, 11.2, and one more time. Okay, the next thing we have to do is we have to start getting the distance. Okay, and this is really just subtraction. The subtraction will tell us how many units away. If it's negative, it's on the left. If it's positive, it's on the right. Eventually, we just want length, not the sign distance. So we'll deal with that in the next thing. But first, we just have to subtract. So we're going to subtract 19 from 11, and of course we can do it by hand and type it in. But let's let StatCrunch do it as our calculator. So we're going to click on Data again, Compute Expression, and I could just type in x minus mean of x, but I'll just do it from here again one more time. So I'm going to start off with x, add that column to my expression, subtract it. You can also use the keyboard. You don't have to click on that. And now I'm going to subtract from that mean of x. And it will take every entry in mean of x and subtract it from the corresponding entry in x. So I click OK, compute, and there it is. The values subtracted, the mean subtracted from the data values with the appropriate heading. Now, as I said, we need to get the stat version of the average distance squared, so which means we're going to take this value and square each one of them. And that's quite easy to do, and we'll do it this time since we know what that just entails. It just entails squaring each entry. So here's the list of columns I can do it with. I'm just going to select that one and put parentheses around it. You know what happens if you don't put parentheses. And I'm going to square the whole thing. And I'm just going to compute it. And it did the squaring and put it in a column and called it mean, kind of long-winded, mean x squared, just so we can see it. Next step is we have to add up all these numbers. We'll use the StatCrunch computation for that. So let's bring this up again so we can hunt for the word sum. There it is. Add that function. And of course, the column that we're summing up is that last column, x minus mean squared. Click OK. Click compute. And there it is. And of course, it's only one number. But in this case, we're not going to deal with calculating any kind of correlation or operation between cells and that number, so we can just leave it alone. To get the variance, we just have to take this number and divide by n minus 1. N is the number of values, and of course that's 5. So let's do it one more time in this facility. Compute expression. The sum that we calculated divided by 4. And we will compute it. And that, let's relabel it because we know it has a very special meaning. So let's just erase this and call this our variance. Okay. Next step is to find the sample standard deviation. So really I should call that sample standard deviation, but since we're dealing with samples, we already know what that is. So let's do that again one more time, compute expression. And let me bring this up, so see if I can get bring up the build so that we can see if we can find the square root function. It's not on the keyboard anywhere. Let's just go down here. It's probably SQRT, typical. There it is, SQRT. Add that function. and we want to take the square root of the variance. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance. Click OK, compute it, and oh, I forgot to add forgot to put in the column that it has to take the square root on. That's why I complained. So I have to move this over there. It's got to be inside the parentheses. And now I'm going to select variance, and I forgot to add the column. Now I'll put that in, and I'll click compute, and there is your sample variance. Okay, so we have gotten this through using StatCrunch, and let me tell you why the technology is so important to learn. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly do this by hand, and we certainly do get the benefit of learning. And yes, so maybe you should try them a couple of times in your natural environment of doing it on paper. But this is just about as good. And the big thing is it reduces the errors. I didn't have to do any subtraction. There were 5 subtractions to do. There were another squares, 5 squares to do, and then I had to add up those 5 numbers and do a couple more operations here. Each operation is another chance. I shouldn't call it chance, another unfortunate incident called an error, and we don't want errors. The mean is also as accurate as StatCrunch can keep it. It's much more accurate in many cases than you can keep it. You'll have trouble dealing with more than, say, 5 decimal places. So again, I really urge you to learn this because it's going to reduce the headache of making errors and then saying, scratching your head and say, well, I mean, I thought I followed the instructions and I came up with something, they keep marking it wrong. Very difficult to find arithmetic operations in all this. So let's check this out. And so the variance is 31.7. Let's put that in here. I'll check the answer, and it really liked it. And I'll put in the variance. It says, make sure you read these directions because MyMathLab, like a lot of computers, are very picky. You put in too many digits, it might mark you wrong. If you so that if you round too much, it'll mark you wrong. So let's see. This is 5.6, nearest tenth. So we're going to round this off to 6. So what we want to put here is 5.6. Check the answer, and lo and behold, we're done. So probably in under 5 minutes or so, after a little bit of practice getting familiar with this, you'll be able to do these things pretty quickly. Okay, so thank you, and maybe we'll do some more of these later.